He opened the bathroom door to scold the new maid, then froze. His sick daughter was laughing for the first time in months, and the woman responsible was someone he had already decided he couldn't trust. The silence in the mansion was louder than any noise. Richard Davis sat behind his massive mahogany desk, staring at his daughter's most recent test results. The numbers were worse than last month's. He blinked once, then twice. But his expression didn't change. It never did. To the world, Richard was a titan, CEO of Davis Global, a billionaire who made his fortune by building, acquiring, and controlling everything in his path. But here, in this cold office with its perfect lighting and untouched bookshelves, he looked like a man made of stone, unmoving, unfeeling, unreachable. There were framed photos on the desk, a younger version of him holding a baby, and beside him, a beautiful woman with fire in her eyes, his late wife, Elise. She'd died the year before, cancer, fast, brutal. Left him with a broken little girl and a silence he didn't know how to fill. He checked his watch, then the hallway camera feed. The new maid was due to arrive. He had no energy for interviews, no space for strangers. His assistant had hired her. Black woman, mid-30s, experience with children, the note said. He barely glanced at the photo. He didn't care. He just wanted order. Cynthia Collins stood in front of the small mirror in the guest room they called the staff quarters. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied her apron. First day, not her first cleaning job, but something about this one was different, bigger, colder, richer. She looked at herself in the mirror, clean, neat, presentable. But behind her eyes there was a familiar ache, a weight she'd carried since she lost her own little girl 5 years ago. She never talked about it. Most people didn't ask. Her hands steadied when she thought of the child upstairs. Emily Davis, 8 years old, diagnosed with a rare degenerative disorder. Her hair had started to fall out. She hadn't smiled in months. Cynthia didn't know what kind of man the father was, but she knew the kind of girl she was here for. "I'm not here for the pay," she whispered to her reflection. "I'm here to matter." Cynthia tiptoed into the pink room with soft clouds painted on the ceiling. Emily lay curled in bed, eyes half-lidded, breathing shallow. No response. But Cynthia didn't speak. Instead, she unpacked a small bag she'd brought herself. Lavender bath beads, a yellow rubber duck, a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web. She moved like a mother, not a cleaner. Richard checked the hallway camera again. He saw movement. Cynthia entering Emily's private bathroom. She hadn't asked permission. He stood up, his jaw clenched. He moved quickly through the halls, fury building behind his eyes. Cynthia knelt beside the tub, sleeves rolled up, gently pouring the green lavender-scented beads into the water. Emily was in the tub, giggling softly as bubbles formed around her. Her cheeks were pink, alive, laughing, for the first time in months. And then the door creaked open. Richard stood there, frozen. Emily looked up and whispered, "Daddy, look." Miss Cynthia makes the water dance. If you've already felt something, anything, during this story, you owe it to yourself to stick around for more. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment it all falls apart, or comes together. Richard didn't speak. His fingers were still on the doorknob, but his mind, it was racing. The air smelled like lavender. The soft echo of Emily's laughter bounced off the marble tiles. His little girl, who hadn't spoken above a whisper in months, was now giggling as Cynthia shaped bubbles into a crown on her head. Cynthia finally looked up. Her eyes widened, not with guilt, but calm awareness. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davis," she said gently. "She asked for a bath. I didn't want to wait for permission." He didn't answer, just stared. His jaw clenched tighter. "You should have told someone," he finally said, voice cold. "She hasn't eaten, hasn't smiled, hasn't moved in days. I thought maybe water would help." His gaze dropped to his daughter. Emily was splashing softly, duck resting on her shoulder. Her smile, real, unforced, was the kind that crushed him. He hated how much he'd missed it. "I'll finish up," Cynthia said, her voice still low, respectful. "Then I'll leave." Emily turned sharply. "No," her voice cracked. "Don't make her go." Richard froze again. The girl clutched Cynthia's wrist with wet, trembling fingers. "She reads funny stories," she said breathlessly. "And she smells like Mom." Silence. Cynthia blinked hard, her hand resting lightly over Emily's. Richard's breath caught. He hadn't realized his daughter remembered her mother's scent, Elise's perfumes, the warm lavender baths, the songs. Cynthia didn't know it, but she was doing everything Elise used to do, by instinct. "I'll wait outside," Richard murmured, backing away like the floor beneath him had cracked open. He poured himself a drink. He never drank before noon. The glass clinked as he sat. He was a man unraveling in a silent war with himself. How had that woman, a stranger, reached his daughter in a way he hadn't in months? And why did it hurt? He pulled open a drawer. Inside was a photo of Elise, holding Emily in a bubble bath. He stared at it, then slammed the drawer shut. He didn't want to feel this way. Didn't want to feel anything. Cynthia sat on the edge of her small bed. Her clothes were damp from bath water. Her hands still smelled of lavender and baby shampoo. She should have been worried, maybe even packing. Instead, she was crying quietly. Tears she couldn't stop. Tears she hadn't let fall since her own daughter's final bath, 5 years ago. The memory she buried. The one that lived behind her eyes every single day. That little girl, Emily, had broken through something she had locked away. And Richard's face, that frozen, shattered look in his eyes. She'd seen that once before, in the mirror, the night her own world collapsed. If you were in Cynthia's shoes, would you have done the same? Stepped in without asking? Or waited for permission in a house built on silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The sun hadn't yet risen over the Davis estate, but Cynthia was already in the kitchen, slicing fruit in silence. Her fingers moved methodically, but her mind was somewhere else. Every detail of yesterday replayed in her head: Emily's smile, the bath, the moment Richard walked in, and the way Emily clung to her, called her mommy with a whisper that shattered something fragile. Cynthia wasn't supposed to be seen. She wasn't hired to connect, just to clean, keep things neat, and disappear into the walls. She was afraid she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Richard sat on the edge of his bed, fully dressed but unmoving. His phone buzzed, a message from his assistant. "Everything okay with the new maid?" He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes were locked on the hallway monitor. The live camera feed showed the kitchen, Cynthia slicing cantaloupe in complete silence, calm, ordinary. But yesterday's image haunted him, that smile on Emily's face, that laugh. He should be grateful, but instead, he was angry, not at Cynthia, at himself, because part of him, a big part, wanted her to stay, and that meant something was shifting, and he didn't like that. Emily lay in bed, clutching the same yellow duck from the bath. Her voice was thin. "Is Miss Cynthia coming back?" Richard sat beside her, adjusting the blanket. "She's busy today." Emily frowned. "She said she'd read to me." "She has other work," he replied, avoiding eye contact. His daughter turned her head away. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She smells like Mommy." That again. Richard swallowed hard. "I know, sweetheart." Emily looked back at him. "Do you miss Mommy?" That question landed like a gut punch. He blinked. Every second. Cynthia pulled a basket from the dryer, folding sheets with quiet focus. She could feel the shift in the house. No one had spoken to her that morning, not Emily, not Richard. Just silence, like the air had turned colder again. She told herself it was better this way. She didn't belong here, not in this house, not with these memories, not with a man like Richard Davis watching her with eyes that were starting to soften and confuse her. She couldn't afford to feel anything. Dinner was quiet. Emily picked at her food. Richard checked his phone too often. Cynthia stood at a distance, waiting to clear plates. Emily looked up. "Miss Cynthia, can you tuck me in tonight?" Richard looked up sharply. Cynthia froze. Before she could respond, Richard spoke. "That's not her job." Emily's face fell. Cynthia stepped back silently, and Richard's guilt bloomed immediately, but he said nothing. He didn't want to let her too close. He couldn't. Cynthia sat in the dark, eyes open. She could hear the faint coughs from Emily's room through the wall. Every part of her wanted to walk down the hallway and just be there, comfort her, read her a bedtime story, but she didn't move. She'd learned the hard way. Get too close, and you bleed. The sound came like a whisper through the walls, a soft, rattling cough. Then another, a sharp wheeze. Cynthia was on her feet before she could think. She pressed her ear to the wall, counted the seconds between coughs. She grabbed her robe, rushed out, and paused just outside Emily's room. The door was cracked open. Richard was already there, sitting beside his daughter, holding her tiny hand in his. He looked tired, angry, and helpless. Cynthia stayed in the hallway, unsure. Then Emily whispered, through labored breaths, "Miss Cynthia." Richard turned. Their eyes met. No words. Just, "Please." He stepped aside. Cynthia entered and knelt by the bed. Emily's forehead was damp, her cheeks pale. She was trembling. "Shh, baby girl," Cynthia whispered. "Let's slow everything down." She pulled the blankets up to Emily's chin, gently smoothing her hair. "Remember the counting game we played?" she asked softly. "Breathe in with me. 1, 2, 3. Emily tried, and again, and again. The wheezing slowed. Her eyes began to close. Richard watched, stunned. He had called doctors, nurses, therapists. No one calmed Emily like this, not even Elise. Cynthia poured hot tea into 2 mugs. She turned and was startled to see Richard leaning against the doorway watching her. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in months, because he hadn't. "You knew exactly what to do," he said, voice low. She handed him a mug. "I've seen kids like her before." He hesitated before asking, "Yours?" A beat. She nodded, then quickly changed the subject. "Emily has a stress-triggered breathing issue. Nothing life-threatening tonight, but it can worsen if she panics." "She hasn't let anyone that close since Elise died," he murmured. "She's just a little girl who misses her mum," Cynthia replied. Richard sat at the kitchen table, his mug untouched. There was a long silence. Then he said it, quietly. "You calmed me down too." Emily sat in a wheelchair on the patio, wrapped in a blanket. The sun peeked through scattered clouds. Richard had insisted she get some fresh air. Cynthia sat beside her, reading aloud from Charlotte's Web, while Emily clutched the duck from the bath. Halfway through the chapter, Emily interrupted. "Miss Cynthia, do you believe in angels?" Cynthia blinked. "I think so. My mommy said they show up when you're really sad and you don't know what to do." Cynthia smiled softly, her voice catching. "Then maybe your mommy was right." Richard, standing nearby, overheard. His eyes never left Cynthia. He stared out the window, watching the 2 of them in the garden. He had never allowed anyone to stay long, but Cynthia wasn't just helping his daughter. She was breaking something open in him too. And that scared him more than he could say. Rain tapped against the tall glass windows like a heartbeat. Cynthia sat curled on the couch with Emily, wrapped in a fleece blanket. They were watching an old animated film, The Iron Giant, one of Elise's favorites. Richard stood by the staircase, watching them quietly. Not as a billionaire, not as a father, just as a man, tired, unsure, and curious. "Where did you learn how to do all this?" he asked, almost without meaning to. Cynthia glanced at him, cautious. "Do what?" He stepped closer. "Soothe her. Talk to her. Handle her like you've known her your whole life." Cynthia's smile was sad. "Because I did know a girl like her once." A pause. She pulled something from her pocket. A small, worn photograph. A little girl in a princess costume, big eyes, big smile. The date was smudged at the corner. "My daughter," she said softly. "Her name was Lily." Richard didn't move. "She got sick when she was 5. Rare blood disorder. She lasted 3 years. The last few months, it was like watching her fade into a ghost." Cynthia's voice cracked. "I used to do everything I'm doing for Emily now. Bath beads, stories, lavender oil on her pillow. It didn't save her, but it gave her comfort. Emily had fallen asleep against Cynthia's shoulder, Duck still tucked in her arms. Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I don't tell many people. He sat across from her now, elbows on his knees. Is that why you took this job? He asked. No, she said honestly. I took it because I needed work. But I stayed because... She reminds me of Lily. And because you remind me of someone too. Who? Myself, she said, meeting his eyes. After I lost everything. Richard stared at the framed photo of Elise again, but this time, he didn't shut the drawer. He pulled it out. Held it. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty room. I didn't know how to do this alone. Cynthia tucked Emily in gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Miss Cynthia, Emily whispered. Yes, sweet girl. Are you an angel? Cynthia swallowed hard. No, baby. I'm just someone who remembers what love feels like. Emily smiled. You smell like love. Cynthia blinked fast. Good night, sweetheart. Cynthia turned off the last light. Behind her, Richard's voice surprised her. You brought this house back to life. She turned, startled. I didn't mean to overstep. You didn't, he said. You did more for my daughter in 2 weeks than I've done in 2 years. She said nothing. Then, quietly, he asked, Do you ever stop missing her? No, she replied. But I stopped hating myself for surviving. At this point, if you're still watching, you're invested. You care. And I see you. So do me one favor. Subscribe. And let's finish this journey together. The backyard had never seen so much life. Richard watched from the porch as Cynthia knelt beside Emily in the garden. The little girl, pale but giggling, clutched a tiny watering can. She poured it clumsily over a baby rosebush. Oops, she squealed, water splashing her shoes. Cynthia laughed, a deep, musical laugh that echoed across the stone tiles. You're supposed to water the plant, not your socks, she teased. Emily leaned into her. You're my favorite grown-up. Cynthia pretended to be shocked. What about your daddy? Emily smirked. He's okay, but he doesn't do bubble baths or voices when he reads. Richard walked over, feigning a scowl. I'll have you know my pirate voice is very impressive. Emily burst out laughing. Cynthia joined her, her hand brushing lightly against Richard's as he knelt beside them. Their eyes met. Not with awkwardness this time, but with ease. The three of them cooked dinner together. Well, Richard mostly watched while Cynthia and Emily turned the kitchen into organized chaos. Flour on the counter, sauce splatter on the stove. Emily wore an apron 2 sizes too big. Cynthia taught her how to knead dough. Richard leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smiling in disbelief. He couldn't remember the last time his house smelled like home. Okay, Cynthia announced, setting the dish in the oven. Now we wait 45 minutes. Emily jumped up. Story time! Emily lay on the couch, head in Cynthia's lap as Cynthia read aloud. Richard sat in the armchair, but he wasn't looking at the book. He was watching Cynthia, her voice, her eyes, the way she smoothed Emily's hair, patient and present. It was something Elise used to do, but it wasn't imitation. It was real, her own, and it was changing him. Richard walked Cynthia to her room. They stopped at her door. Thank you, he said. For what? For giving me my daughter back. Cynthia's smile was quiet. She was always there, just waiting for someone to see her again. He nodded. Then, hesitant, he asked, And what about you? Do you feel seen? A pause. No one's asked me that in a long time, she whispered. Their eyes lingered longer than either of them meant. Then Cynthia stepped back. Good night, Mr. Davis. Good night, Cynthia. Emily slept peacefully, her breathing soft. The duck nestled beside her. Outside her door, Richard stood for a moment, just listening. Inside his chest, something warm, fragile but undeniable, began to bloom. The warmth of the last few days still lingered like a faint scent in the air, cinnamon, laughter, something like peace. Richard sat at his desk, staring at an email with a furrowed brow. Subject? Background check. Cynthia Collins attached were pages of information, and one file that froze him mid-breath. A news article. 4 years ago. Mother accused of negligence in daughter's death after home accident. Lily Collins, age 8, died in a bathtub, supervised by her mother, Cynthia Collins. Richard leaned back, heart thundering. His daughter had been bathing with Cynthia alone. His daughter, who once stopped breathing in the tub, the woman he'd trusted, had been at the center of another little girl's death. Cynthia was slicing apples for Emily's snack. She turned at the sound of hard footsteps behind her. Richard entered, eyes cold again, like winter had returned. "You said she died from an illness," he said flatly. Cynthia froze. What?" He held up his phone. "You lied to me." Her face drained. "I didn't lie." "You didn't tell the whole truth," he snapped. "She died in a bathtub. You were charged with negligence." Cynthia's voice shook. "I wasn't guilty." "You didn't tell me," he shouted. "You were alone with my daughter, in water, and you never thought I should know." The words hung heavy. Cynthia dropped the knife, hands trembling. "Because I knew exactly how it would sound," she said, voice cracking. "I've lived under that shadow for years. Everyone reads the headline. No one reads the full story." Richard stepped back. "I can't take that risk. Not with Emily." Tears filled Cynthia's eyes, but she swallowed them down. "I saved your daughter. I loved her." "I don't need you to love her," he said coldly. "I need her to be safe." That hurt more than she expected, and she realized this wasn't about safety. It was about trust. And he didn't have it. Not really. She nodded slowly. "I'll pack my things." Emily clutched her stuffed duck, confused. Her lips trembled. She said goodbye, Daddy. But she didn't want to. Richard sat on the edge of the bed. She had to go. Was it my fault? His throat tightened. "No, baby. Not at all." Emily turned away from him. "You make people leave." Cynthia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the packed suitcase. Her hands clutched Lily's photo. It wasn't the pain of being judged that broke her. It was the look in Emily's eyes when she said goodbye. It was how easily Richard went cold again. He stood at the window, drink untouched. Everything was quiet again, sterile, controlled, and empty. He played the security footage from that first bath. Emily's laughter, Cynthia's touch, the life returning to a child who'd been fading. Then he replayed her last words before leaving. "I saved your daughter. I loved her." And suddenly, his control didn't feel like strength. It felt like cowardice. The suitcase sat by the door, untouched since last night. Cynthia hadn't slept. She sat in silence, Lily's photo on her lap, her fingers tracing the worn edges. The sun peeked in through the thin curtains, casting soft gold over her grief. She had been here before, discarded, misunderstood, blamed for a pain she never wanted to carry. But this time was different. This time she had let herself hope, and that was the wound that hurt most of all. Richard stared at the unopened folder on his desk, the one with Cynthia's case file, the one he'd used to judge her. His phone buzzed, new message from Elise's sister. "Heard you hired someone. Emily sounds better. Elise would have loved that. Just don't mess it up because you're scared." He closed his eyes. Her voice rang in his mind. "You make people leave." Emily's words from last night. That was Elise's fear too. She had told him once, "Your armor will become your prison, Richard. One day you won't just keep people out, you'll lock yourself in." And he was locked in now, alone, again. Richard stepped into his daughter's room. She was awake, but didn't look at him. "Good morning," he said gently. "Nothing." "Can I sit?" She gave the smallest shrug. He sat. "I made a mistake, Em." Still nothing. "I got scared. When I read what happened to Miss Cynthia's daughter, I panicked. I thought I was protecting you." Her eyes finally met his. "But I forgot that sometimes the best protection isn't walls. It's people who care." Emily's bottom lip trembled. "She did care," she whispered. He nodded, ashamed. "I know. I just didn't realize how much until she was gone." Emily held out the duck. "She gave me this when I was crying after Mommy." Richard took it gently. "Do you want me to bring her back?" Emily nodded once, then twice, hard. Cynthia zipped up her bag. She took one last look around the room. A soft knock interrupted her. She turned and froze. Richard stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, unsure for the first time in a long time. "I didn't come here to apologize," he started, "because I don't think words are enough." She didn't speak. He stepped inside. "I read the full case, the real story. You weren't negligent. You were a mother who couldn't save her daughter, and I'm a father who couldn't save my wife. A beat. Emily needs you, but so do I." Cynthia blinked. "That night in the bath," he said quietly, "when she laughed, it wasn't just her that came back to life. It was this house. It was me." She studied him, saw the crack in his armor, the truth in his eyes. "Then why did you send me away?" she whispered. "Because I was afraid you were the one person who could make me feel again." Silence. Then, "I'm still afraid." Cynthia walked over, eyes glistening. "You should be," she whispered back. But she didn't move away. The light poured gently through the window as Emily stirred in her bed, eyelids fluttering open. She blinked and smiled. Cynthia was sitting by her bedside, reading Charlotte's Web aloud like nothing had changed. "And Wilbur never forgot the warmth of a friend who saved him," Cynthia read softly, her voice warm and sure. Emily reached for her hand. "You came back." Cynthia nodded, fighting back tears. "I always will." From the doorway, Richard watched in silence, his hands in his pockets, his heart fuller than it had been in years. The kitchen was alive again, muffins in the oven, music playing low. Emily sat at the table drawing with crayons. Cynthia washed dishes, humming gently. Richard entered, holding a steaming mug of coffee. Cynthia turned, unsure. He handed her the mug. "Still don't know how you take it," he said with a soft smile. "Strong. No sugar," she replied. He nodded. "Same." A shared glance, quiet, peaceful. Emily called from the table. "Daddy, draw with us." Richard hesitated, then walked over. He sat beside her and took a crayon. "I'm drawing Miss Cynthia," Emily said proudly. Cynthia looked over and laughed. "Be kind, kiddo," Emily grinned. "I'll make your hair extra curly." The three of them sat beneath the rose bush Emily had watered days earlier. Small blossoms had begun to peek through the stems. "I think she's growing," Emily whispered. "She's blooming," Cynthia said. Richard looked over. "Just like you." They sat in silence for a moment, one of those rare, sacred silences filled with meaning. Cynthia turned to him. "You ever think about what comes next?" "All the time," he admitted. "And? I don't know, but I know I don't want to do it alone." A pause. "I know I want my daughter to grow up seeing what love looks like, what safety looks like, what healing feels like." Cynthia looked at him, hard. "This isn't simple." "I know," he said, "but nothing worth keeping ever is." Emily curled up between Richard and Cynthia on the couch as the final credits rolled on her favorite movie. She was half asleep. Richard draped a blanket over her, brushing her hair from her face. He glanced at Cynthia. "She said once you smell like love," he murmured. Cynthia smiled softly. "She saved me too, you know." He nodded. "Then maybe we all saved each other." They sat there, in silence, a quiet family formed not by blood alone, but by loss, trust, and choosing to love again anyway. A delivery driver approached with a clipboard. Cynthia answered the door. "Package for Mr. Davis." She took it. Inside, Richard opened it. Inside, A frame with a photo Cynthia hadn't seen before. Elise, holding baby Emily in a bubble bath, and beside it a second frame, the three of them, taken yesterday in the garden, fresh, alive. Richard looked at Cynthia. "She'd have liked you," he said. "I like her too," Cynthia whispered, touching the photo. "Do you believe true love can grow from grief and survive the weight of the past? Let us know in the comments. And if someone helped you heal, share your story. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if it reminded you of love, regret, or hope, don't just scroll away. Subscribe, because the next one might hit even harder.